I remember the room going quiet before the words even landed. April 1841, Cypress Grove. The master raised a glass and said, "From this night on, my daughter belongs to him." To me. I was a slave with calloused hands and a name most men refused to say. Ezekiel. She was Catherine. 28, heavy in body, shaking from medicines that kept her quiet. The white guests tried to hide their faces, but I saw it. The shock, the hunger for scandal. They thought it was a joke, a punishment, a show. They did not know what I knew. They did not know the cellar under that house. They did not know the ledger. They did not know why her hands trembled or why my jaw would not. Before I tell you what happened to Catherine's body, how it changed, what I did, and why 13 men would be dead by winter, do one thing for me. Subscribe and comment your state below so I know where you're watching from. If you're still here after this next line, you care about buried truth. I did not ask to hold a white man's daughter in my charge, but I took that charge like a blade, because a blade can cut two ways. One for the master, one for the chains. What did I do to her body that left them whispering my name like a curse and a prayer? And what did they do in that cellar that made me choose blood over fear? Colleton County, South Carolina. The land looked rich to those who never worked it. Broad rivers moved like black mirrors through the swamps. Rice fields stretched into the horizon, flooded with water that reached a man's knees. Spanish moss draped the oak trees like funeral cloth. The air was heavy, always damp, always thick, as if even the wind carried sorrow. This was where Cypress Grove Plantation stood. 800 acres of suffering disguised as wealth. 58 enslaved men, women, and children bent their backs from sunrise to dusk, their sweat and blood feeding one man's ambition. That man was Silas Rutledge. Silas was not the wealthiest planter, though he wanted to be. The great families of Charleston mocked him behind closed doors. He had enough land to be respected, but not enough to be feared. And for a man like Silas, respect without fear was useless. He wanted power, and for power he would trade anything. His money, his daughter, even his soul. For nearly 20 years, Silas had been part of a secret brotherhood called the Brethren of the Harvest. 13 men, all landowners, who believed blood made the soil stronger. They whispered about sacrifice, about feeding the land with life so crops would never fail. Some thought it superstition. Others knew better. Catherine, Silas's only daughter, had seen the truth at 12 years old. She saw what no child should see in that cellar, and she never forgot, no matter how much poison he poured into her veins to make her forget. By 1841, Catherine was 28, her body swollen from years of mercury, laudanum, and overfeeding, her face pale, her hands trembling, her mind a fog her father claimed was hysteria. But it was not madness, it was memory. The county pitied Silas for having a broken daughter. They whispered about her weight, her fits of rage, her isolation. They said she was unfit for marriage, a burden no man would take. They never asked why she screamed at night. They never wondered why she feared her father's cellar more than death itself. Silas played his role well. To outsiders, he was the grieving widower, the dutiful father. Behind closed doors, he was something colder. He saw his daughter not as blood, but as a bargaining chip. When the brethren demanded proof of loyalty, he offered Catherine like she was property, less than property. He said she would be placed under the control of one of his slaves. And that slave was me. My name was Ezekiel Cross. By then, I had lost everything. My wife Sarah, my children Benjamin and Ruth. Silas sold them away years earlier, sending them to a plantation in Alabama, known for working people to death. They were gone before I could even fight for them. And so I learned patience. I learned silence. I waited until I was sold again and again, making my way south closer to Cypress Grove, closer to the man who destroyed me. Silas thought I was quiet, obedient, useful for carpentry and herbs. He thought I would bend under his orders. What he didn't know was that I carried 3 names on a slip of paper hidden under my shirt. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, my family, my reason. And now, with his daughter in my hands, I saw my chance. 31 Alabama. 1 plantation. 1 forbidden decision. Trail of blood begins. Question for you. Would you have taken Catherine as burden, or as weapon? The wagon rolled into Cypress Grove on a gray April morning. The wheels creaked. The mule snorted, and I sat in the back, wrists chained but mind sharper than the blade they would not let me carry. The trader who drove me, Henderson, spat tobacco juice over the side and called out for the master. Silas Rutledge stepped onto the porch, thin as a rail, his face pulled tight like leather left too long in the sun. His hair was gray, but his eyes were cold, calculated. He looked at me the way a butcher looks at an ox, sizing up meat, not a man. Most enslaved men lowered their eyes. Survival demanded it. But I didn't. I looked straight at him, steady, unblinking. And I saw it, the flicker of discomfort that passed across his face. He wasn't used to being seen, not like that. Not by someone who remembered. The papers were signed quick. My name, Ezekiel Cross, barely glanced at. Henderson muttered something about me being quiet, capable, obedient. Silas nodded, pretending to believe it. But in truth, I had been placed here on purpose, chosen. My skills with herbs, my silence, my patience. They thought I was perfect for Catherine. They led me not to the fields, not to the slave quarters, but to a small cabin near the main house. "You'll tend to my daughter," Silas said. "She is unwell. Doctors failed her. If you fail too, you will wish you hadn't been born." I nodded, said, "Yes, sir," because that was what he wanted. But inside I thought of Sarah's laughter, of Benjamin's math lessons at only 8 years old, of Ruth, who loved to braid flowers into her hair. I thought of the day Silas ripped them from me, smiling as my boy screamed, clutching my leg. That smile carved itself into my memory, sharper than any whip. That night in the cabin, I unwrapped a small cloth I carried under my shirt. Inside was the scrap of paper with their 3 names written in a child's shaky hand. I traced each one with my finger. I whispered them like a prayer. They were gone, but their names were fuel. The next morning, a house servant named Judith took me upstairs. She knocked on a locked door. "Miss Catherine? Your father's brought someone to help." A crash from inside, glass shattering. Then a voice, slurred but fierce. "I don't want more doctors. Send him away." Judith looked at me with pity. She has her bad days. This is one. I opened the door anyway. The room was dark, curtains drawn tight. The smell was thick. Unwashed sheets, laudanum, something rotten. Catherine sat hunched in a chair. Hair wild, face puffy, body wrapped in a stained gown. Her hands trembled against the armrest. Her eyes found me. First confusion, then fear, then anger. "Who are you?" I said no more poison. I spoke low, steady. "I'm not a doctor. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help." She laughed bitterly, a sound like broken glass. "Help, that's what they all say. Help means chains. Help means silence." But when I pulled the curtains open, sunlight spilled across her face. She winced, covered her eyes. I asked her when she'd last walked outside. She said she couldn't, too weak. "Too sick?" I told her softly. "What if the doctors are wrong? What if your father has been poisoning you to keep you this way?" Silence. Her trembling stopped. Her eyes widened. That was the moment it began, our secret pact. 41 South Carolina. A daughter in chains of poison, a man with nothing left to lose. Question for you. If you saw the truth in her eyes, would you trust her or fear her? The first days were battles of silence. Catherine would not eat unless I stood there and swore the food was untouched by her father's hand. She would not drink unless I poured it myself. She spat out medicine bottles, swore they were filled with poison. And she was right. I recognized the bitter smell of mercury, the syrupy taste of laudanum. I had seen overseers use them to quiet slaves who screamed too loudly at night. Too much of either and a body bloats, the hands tremble, the mind fogs. Silas had been dosing his own daughter for years, not to cure her, but to bury her alive in her own skin one night. When the house was asleep, Catherine whispered, "I remember what they did in the cellar." I said nothing at first. The words were too heavy, she went on, voice shaking. "I was 12. I woke in the night and followed the noise. I saw them. 13 men, all in robes, my father, Judge Pelam, Reverend Crenshaw. They had a woman on the table, alive. I watched them cut her, watched them drink from her. They said it made the land strong." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were sharp. "They told me it wasn't real. They told me I imagined it. For 16 years they've called me mad. But I know what I saw. I wanted to tell her I believed her. But belief was dangerous. So I asked carefully, 'Why are you telling me this?' She stared at me, studying my face. Because you are not like the others. You don't look at me like I'm broken. You look at me like you've seen worse. She was right. That night I told her my own truth. I told her about Sarah, Benjamin, and Ruth. How Silas sold them to Alabama. How they died within a year. Sarah from fever, Benjamin from a wound that turned black, Ruth from refusing to eat, her little body giving up when she realized her family was gone. Catherine's face twisted with rage. He sold them. For the brethren. To prove himself. I knew it. We sat in silence, the weight of it pressing against us like the swamp air. Then Catherine leaned forward, whispering through clenched teeth, I want them all dead. My father, the judge, the reverend, every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to beg first. I want them to suffer. Her words chilled me. Not because of the hatred, but because of the clarity. People called her mad, but madness doesn't plan vengeance with that kind of precision. Madness doesn't remember names, dates, details. Catherine remembered everything. That night, a pact was born. I would strip the poison from her body, sharpen her mind, and return her strength. Return, she would give me the names, the secrets, the hidden map of Cypress Grove. Together, she said, gripping my hand harder than I expected. We will make them pay, and when it's done, you will let me die. I will not live with what I have seen. Her eyes glittered in the dim light, and in them I saw not madness, but something more dangerous. Purpose, 141, South Carolina. 2 enemies bound by hate. 1 plan forged in whispers. Question for you. Would you make a pact with someone broken if it meant your revenge could finally breathe? I learned that healing can be a brutal thing. At first, Catherine's body fought me like some stubborn animal. The doctors had fed her laudanum, mercury, and every sweet poison they could hide in a jar. Those things make a body soft and slow, make a voice quiet and forgetful. They make witnesses useless. Pull them away too fast and the body rebels. Fever, tremors, vomiting. A mind that claws its way back from sleep. So I did it slow. I was careful because I had to be. The house watched. The brethren watched. Silas watched. If they suspected I was doing anything but following orders, they would kill us both. I started small. Tea instead of syrup. Bitters and herbs to pull the mercury from her blood. I brewed milk thistle and dandelion root. Ground the bark of a willow for pain. Simmered chamomile until the cup smelled like peace. When she balked, I told her stories. I used laughter like a bandage. I fed her thin broths at first, then small cuts of lean meat, then slow-cooked greens. I counted every crumb she swallowed and marked it in a little book I kept hidden. The withdrawal was savage. For 3 days she could not stand. She shook until the floor seemed to sway. Her skin flushed and she threw up what she had eaten for years. Sometimes she screamed, not the mad shouting the county whispered about, but a raw animal sound, a memory dragged up like a stone from a riverbed. I slept in a chair by her bed, hands always ready with cool cloths, a basin, a whispered name when she could hear no one else. When the worst passed, something changed. The fog lifted in tiny steps. Her words came clearer, her gaze focused. For the first time in years, she read a page without losing the meaning halfway through. When she smiled, it was small, wary, like sunlight cautious through storm clouds. But healing was only part of the plan. Soft body might be better, but it alone could not strike back. She needed strength. She needed to move. Catherine hated exercise. She hated it like she hated most things that reminded her she had a body that could act. I started with the easiest tasks, a walk to the window, then to the hallway. We counted steps like prayers. Each day we added a few more. I made her push a wooden cart for a short distance, lift a small sack of rice, swing a light mallet for carpentry practice. Muscle crept back into her limbs where years of sedation had melted it away. Her breath grew steady. Her posture changed. The heavy weight she carried did not disappear overnight. But the weight within her, the part that had been numbed, began to sharpen. More important was the sharpening of her mind. We spoke late into the night, and she told me more about the cellar, names, faces, rituals timed to moon and harvest. She could recite the ledger's code, the way her father spoke of certain dates. I learned the times guests usually came, the weak points in the house's guard, who drank too much and who slept too little. She corrected my details. taught her how to steady a hand, how to hide emotion, how to read a map of the house as if it were second nature. There was a darker thing that happened during those weeks. She grew hungrier, not for food, but for a shape of justice I had not expected. Where she had been dull and confused, now there sat a hard, cold kernel, a desire so exact it frightened me. She began to speak in plans, in lists. Names came out like prayers. Pelham, she'd say, May 14th, always present at harvest. She'd trace a route through the house with the tip of her finger, and then look at me. And I understood every time she was naming a wound I would stitch. We worked in secrecy. I hid herbs in the seams of her dresses. I kept the little ledger of our progress in a hollowed beam in my cabin. I learned to move through the main house like a ghost, fetching, sweeping, listening. When Silas came to check, I bowed and moved with the quiet only a man who plans can master. By the time she could walk without help, she was no longer the frightened woman who had spat out her medicine. She was a force a heavy river turned to ice. Her hands steadied around the handles of tools. She learned the weight of a blade, not to kill yet, but to hold and not flinch. Her eyes, once blurred, now burned with a steady light that knew names and had a way to use them. In the quiet after one of our long sessions, she said, soft as a vow, "When this is done, I want to die." My jaw tightened. "Not yet," I told her. "Not until they know." She nodded as if she agreed. Inside, I swore not to let her die until the ledger lay where everyone could see it. But even then, the promise she had given me sat like a cold thing between us, one I could not take back. 41, South Carolina. Medicine pulled away, strength returned, a mind sharpened. The blade in our hands grew heavier. Question for you. If you could trade a life for a truth, would you do it? April 29th, 1841. Cypress Grove's dining room glowed with candlelight. Silver polished until it blinded. Food laid out like a king's feast. Oysters. Duck rice cakes that rose higher than any pride. The finest families of Colleton County had been invited. Judges, bankers, reverends, planters. The same men who whispered behind Silas Rutledge's back that he was desperate. Second tier, not truly one of them. That night, he wanted to prove them wrong. And he used Catherine to do it. I served the guests quietly with the other house servants. Trays of wine, plates of duck. But unlike the others, my ears caught every word. I saw every smirk, every curious glance toward Catherine seated at her father's right hand. They expected her to be wild, shaking, embarrassing, but she sat still, calm, eating sparingly. Her face thinner, her eyes clearer. They didn't know the cost of that clarity. The nights of fever, the vomit, the whispered pacts in darkness. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass. The chatter died instantly. His voice filled the hall. "My friends, thank you for coming. As you know, my daughter has long suffered an illness no doctor could cure. We tried Charleston. We tried Philadelphia. Nothing helped until recently," he gestured to me. All eyes turned. Some shocked, some disgusted. A slave standing in the candlelight, singled out like an honored guest. 2 weeks ago, Silas continued, I placed my daughter in the care of this man, Ezekiel. His knowledge of herbs succeeded where medicine failed. Look at her now, clear, steady. Better than she has been in years. A murmur rippled across the room. Judge Pelham leaned forward, frowning. Reverend Crenshaw's wife covered her mouth. They were not impressed, they were scandalized. A daughter of a plantation owner given into the hands of a slave. It shattered every rule they pretended to hold sacred. And then Silas twisted the knife. Catherine's recovery requires constant, intimate care. After much prayer, I have decided to grant Ezekiel full responsibility for her. From this day forward, he has complete authority over her treatment, her daily activities, even her living arrangements. Gasps, utensils dropped. Mrs. Pelham whispered, Surely this is a jest. Reverend Crenshaw stood half out of his chair. Silas, you cannot mean placing your own blood under a Negro's authority? There are limits. Silas's face hardened, his jaw sharp as stone. My daughter's health is above limits, above custom. This is my decision, and it is final. Then his eyes cut toward Catherine. Daughter, tell them you agree. The room held its breath. Catherine could have ended it then. She could have screamed the truth, named the cellar, the rituals, the ledger. But she didn't. She smiled instead, small, bitter, perfectly controlled. I trust my father's judgment, she said. Ezekiel has been kind. His treatments help me. I am content. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some guests rose early, muttering excuses. Others lingered, whispering to Silas in private. I heard fragments near the study door. The brethren will not approve. Are you certain this is wise? You risk everything. Silas only nodded, smug in the scandal he had planted. He thought humiliation was power. He thought shame was loyalty. But I saw Catherine's hand under the table, gripping her napkin until her knuckles turned white. I saw the flicker in her eyes, promising what no one else could read. She was playing the obedient daughter only long enough to sharpen the blade. That night, when I went to her room, she stood at the window, voice steady as stone. They think I am pathetic. They think I am broken. They have no idea what we are planning. Neither did Silas, but he would. 1841, South Carolina. A father shamed his daughter before the county. A pact turned sharper in silence. Question for you. If you were her, would you have spoken the truth then, or waited for revenge? May 14th came like a storm held behind clouds. That was the day Silas left for Charleston, 3 days away on business. Catherine had marked it in her journals years ago, waiting for the moment the house would fall quiet. That night, when the candles burned low and the overseers drank themselves to sleep, Catherine met me by the kitchen pantry. Her hair was tied back, her body wrapped in plain dark cloth. She looked nothing like the trembling woman I had first seen in her chamber. She looked like someone going to war. The pantry door had a false wall. To anyone else, it was just wood paneling. But Catherine pressed a knot in the timber, and with a click it opened. Narrow stairs wound down into the earth. A smell hit us immediately, damp, smoke, and something worse. Blood that had sunk into soil and refused to leave. The cellar stretched wide, beams sagging, earth packed hard by years of rituals. At the center stood the altar, a thick wooden table stained black with grooves cut deep into the edges. Candles lined the walls along with jars sealed with wax, and robes hanging limp like skin. This is where they did it, Catherine whispered. This is where I watched. But she didn't stop there. She walked to the far wall, touched a stone, and pressed. With a grind, a hidden panel swung open. A second chamber breathed out its secrets. Inside, on a wooden stand, lay the book, the ledger. It was enormous, 2 feet tall, bound in dark leather with iron clasps. Smaller journals surrounded it, but the ledger drew the eye like a wound. Catherine's breath trembled. Every name, every ritual. They keep records so none of them can betray the others. Equal guilt, equal silence. I opened it. The pages were thick, written in a precise hand. Names, dates, sacrifices, 40 years of blood, enslaved people, poor whites, children. Notes on how flesh was prepared, how blood was drained, how the harvest was fed. I turned to 1838, and there it was in 3 lines. Purchased family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah, children Benjamin, Ruth. Male separated to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received, that was it. My family reduced to 3 lines. I wanted to tear the book apart, burn it, scream until the walls caved in. But Catherine gripped my arm. No, not yet. We need proof. We need to copy what matters. If we burn it now, they'll know, so we worked. For hours, she copied pages in her coded hand, the same symbols she'd used in her journals. I wrote names of the dead, victims erased from every record except here. The air grew heavy with each entry. My hands shook more than once. Catherine had to step outside into the main chamber to breathe. We were so focused we did not hear the footsteps until it was too late. Lantern light flared in the doorway. Shadows stretched across the chamber. Silas Rutledge stood there, flanked by 2 men. Behind him, more figures crowded the cellar stairs. His voice was calm, almost proud. I must admit, I didn't think you would find the inner chamber. But you did, and now you know. Catherine froze. Her father's eyes cut into her. Did you really think I would not expect this? That I would not prepare for the day you remembered. My heart pounded, but I kept my face still. We were trapped. The ledger open, the truth bare, and 13 wolves circling. 41 Cypress Grove. A secret uncovered. A trap sprung. Question for you. If you found proof of evil in your hands, would you risk keeping it, or burn it all before they could stop you? They led us up from the cellar like animals caught in a trap. The heavy door slammed behind us and the house felt smaller, closer, watching. Silas walked between us as if he owned the air itself. Judge Pelam, Reverend Crenshaw, Marcus Fanning, faces I had seen in courtrooms, at funerals, in church pews, closed around us. Pride made them move like kings, but fear tightened their hands. They put us in Silas's study and locked the door. The room had no low windows, only a transom too high to reach. Light pressed through like a harsh eye. They left us there, then came back with more men until the room smelled of pipe smoke and linen starch. I could hear the cellar chamber below like a heartbeat, steady and dead. Silas sat and folded his hands as if he were judging us already. "Brothers," he said, voice soft, "this is a problem that needs a solution." They argued like men deciding on business, but the subject was life and death. Judge Pelam wanted us killed quietly. No scandal, no stories. Others agreed. I watched their mouths work. They had been trained to make cruelty sound reasonable. Reverend Crenshaw pretended sorrow, calling for prayer. Marcus Fanning, shaken, feared the ruin of his name. Then Silas did something worse. He smiled, and I felt the smile like a blade. "There is another way," he said. "We can absorb this. We can test this man's loyalty. Ezekiel here has cause to hate us. If he can be trained, if he can be brought into our circle, he proves our power. He proves that even enemies bend. And if he refuses, well, we dispose of both of them." The room leaned forward like a trap snapping shut. I heard the word dispose and tasted iron. Catherine stood very still. Her face was white but set. "I will not be silenced," she said. Her voice was small, but it cut the room harder than I expected. Silas looked pleased at the resistance. "We do not kill family lightly. She is blood. If we can make him a tool, he is useful. We offer him membership, associate status, not full. He will attend gatherings. He will prove himself in a trial. In exchange, I will give him means to find the man in Alabama who ruined his life. Money, contacts, revenge. It was obscene. Join the men who sold my family to get revenge on some other man? Complicity for pay." The offer hung in the air like rot. I thought of Sarah's laugh, Benjamin's small face, Ruth braiding flowers. I thought of the paper in my shirt with their names. I had one choice: accept and become part of the wheel that crushed us, or refuse and be ground between those cogs. I looked at Catherine. Her eyes asked for something I could not give easily: live. I said nothing at first. They watched for a sign. Then, because I saw no path that did not end in our death if I resisted, I made the decision that would buy us time. I accepted their bargain, but with a single condition: Catherine must go free. Not back to her room. Not to be medicated until she died. Free. Leave South Carolina. A new name, money, distance. If she survived, she could tell nothing and live. If she could not, then I would have failed. They debated. The room smelled of trade, of favors and power. Judge Pelam muttered that a woman like Catherine could never be believed anywhere. "She's broken," he said. Who would listen? Marcus argued it was risky to let the only witness walk away. But power convinces power, Silas promised. And with enough nods and the clink of hands, the bargain was made. They mocked us with ritual words, eagle feathers of their duty. They made me kneel later, slower than any Christian prayer I had ever heard. They called it initiation. They stripped me bare of pride and bound my hands behind me. They said the test would prove my loyalty. I knew then that the test would demand a dark thing. Catherine's face when they led her away for the preparations was not surrender. It was a map of plans. She mouthed, "Trust me." I mouthed back, "Live." 1841, Cypress Grove. Promises made in shadow. The hunted buy time with words. The question for you: if a chance to survive asks you to wear the enemy's face, would you put it on? They brought the chamber alive that night with a smell of oil and smoke and something worse. An iron tang that sits under your tongue like a warning. My hands were tied behind me, wrists raw from the ropes. They had stripped me to the waist as if to make me small. But shame could not make me small. Anger kept me bigger than my bindings. The brethren moved like men rehearsed in cruelty. Robes whispering, faces half hidden, candles setting their teeth to fire. Silas stood at the head of the circle as if he owned the dark. The altar gleamed, fresh with wax, and at its middle lay a young woman bound and gagged. She was barely a slip of a thing, eyes wide with terror. I thought of Ruth, I thought of Benjamin. The room narrowed to that single girl's breathing. Silas spoke low, the words of a man giving a sermon. Tonight we test him. If he will join us, let him show he can do what is necessary. Take the knife, Ezekiel. Make the first cut. Name the land's hunger and feed it. He pushed the blade into my hands. It was heavy and cold, like a promise. All my careful plans condensed into the weight of that moment. I could feel the names beneath my shirt, the scrap with Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth burning like coals. They had offered me membership, a bargain wrapped in filth. They had sold my family, and now wanted the stain of blood on my palms to prove I belonged to them. They wanted me to become like them. I raised the knife. For a breath, the world narrowed to the young woman's eyes, terrified and pleading. I thought of the ledger with its neat lines, the men who had eaten and laughed. The life I wanted for revenge did not include joining the men who made me a ghost. There was another way, one I had been building in my mind for weeks. It would require violence, a truth I had accepted long before. But it had to be their violence turned outward. So I did the thing they did not expect. I moved the blade, but not toward the woman. I lunged at the nearest robed man. The knife found throat before the chant could finish. Blood answered with a sound like a bell. Chaos swallowed the room. Roars and curses filled the chamber. Men stumbled, robes thrown back, candles toppled. I grabbed a fallen robe and pulled it to shield my face from smoke. I shoved through the circle, every motion a prayer and a crime. My plan had been crude and absolute. Make noise, break their order, free the girl, and buy time until Catherine's people could strike. Fists found me. A boot cracked ribs. A man tried to pin my arm, but years of work with hands that built and broke saved me. I fought like someone who'd practiced anger in secret. I pulled the gag from the woman's mouth and shouted, "Run!" She scrambled free, feet finding the stairs. And then, like a thunderclap, Catherine's voice. It echoed from above, and for a second I thought the roof would lift with the sound. She had not gone to Philadelphia. She had not vanished. She had been hiding in the quarters, gathering those who had nothing left to lose. A small army of names, men and women I had seen bending in the fields whose children had disappeared, poured down the stairs. They came with tools for work and tools for war, axes, hammers, iron spikes. They moved with a hunger that no sermon could satisfy. The brethren were men who bought violence. They were not fighters. They were surprised by the force that came at them. Surprised and then crushed beneath it. The chamber became a place of retribution. Judge Pelham reached for a pistol and fell before he could fire. Reverend Crenshaw pleaded with God and found no answer. Marcus Fanning tried to climb to safety and was dragged back into the dark. Silas lunged for Catherine, knife flashing. She twisted free, elbows like iron, and struck him down with the same ruthless calm she had planned months for. When the last breath left that room, it sounded like a relief, not for what we had done. That truth sat heavy, but for what had been ended. 13 men who'd thought themselves untouchable lay where their sins had any claim. The ledger burned before dawn. We piled wood and oil and let the pages blacken until they were only lightless ash. 41 Cypress Grove. A ritual turned into a riot. Revenge found teeth. Question for you. If violence breaks a cycle of cruelty, does that make it justice or another wound? The cellar reeked of smoke, sweat, and iron. Bodies sprawled across the dirt. Robes torn. Blood soaking into the grooves of the altar where they had once carved others. For years, this room had been their temple. That night, it became their tomb. But Silas wasn't finished. Even as the last of the brethren fell, he staggered up, face pale, knife flashing. He grabbed Catherine, pressing the blade against her throat. His voice cut through the noise. "Stop! Stop or she dies." For a heartbeat, the room froze. The enslaved fighters, still holding their bloodied tools, waited. I stood a few paces away, chest heaving, knife slick in my hand. Catherine didn't flinch. Her eyes met mine, calm, burning. "Do it," she hissed at her father. "Kill me, it changes nothing." "You've already lost." The words struck harder than steel. Silas's hand shook, fury spilling through his teeth. Ungrateful child. Everything I did was for legacy, for power. For you. Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. You poisoned me for 16 years. You made me forget. You called me mad while you murdered women in this cellar. You don't deserve the word father. That broke something in him. His grip faltered for just a second. It was all I needed. I lunged, steel meeting flesh. His knife clattered as mine found its mark. Silas staggered, clutching at his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at me not as a master, not even as a man, but as the face of his end. You think this makes you free? He gasped. There will always be more of us. I leaned close as he sank to his knees. Maybe, but not you. Never you. His last breath rattled out, and for the first time, Catherine stood without trembling. She looked down at his body as if it were nothing more than a broken chair. Not triumph, not sorrow, just release. Around us, silence settled. The enslaved people stared at the corpses of men who had owned them, whipped them, stolen their children. Some cried, some laughed. Some simply stood stunned by what they had done. Catherine's voice broke the stillness. This house will not stand another night. We dragged the bodies together, stacking them in the chamber. Candles toppled into oil. Flames licked the beams, then roared. The fire took the ledger, the robes, the altar, all of it. We climbed the stairs, smoke chasing us into the kitchen. Outside, the night air was cool and wet, but behind us, Cypress Grove began to glow like dawn made of fire. The blaze spread quick, greedy, devouring walls, swallowing windows. Sparks leapt into the sky. The enslaved stood in the yard, faces lit by orange light. Some wanted to cheer. Some crossed themselves. Others simply watched, their silence saying more than words. For the first time in years, they saw their masters burn. Catherine stood beside me, her gown torn, her hair wild, her body stronger than it had been in decades. She whispered, 16 years of poison, 16 years of silence. Tonight it ends, and then she turned to me. When the last beam falls, we walk away. No one will believe the truth if we tell it. But the story will live, in whispers, in quarters, around fires. The roof groaned, timbers splitting as flames swallowed the last of the house. Cypress Grove, once a monument to ambition and cruelty, collapsed into ash. 1941, South Carolina. 13 men dead. One plantation burning, one truth set loose into the world. Question for you. If fire erased every trace of evil, would you let it burn, or would you save the proof? By dawn, nothing of Cypress Grove remained but blackened beams jutting out of ash. Smoke hung low over the fields, seeping into the swamp like a curse dissolving in water. The grand house that once stood as Silas Rutledge's pride was now a grave. The enslaved who had fought beside us melted back into the night before daylight could betray them. They carried their silence like armor. No one would speak of what happened. They had learned long ago that survival lived in secrets. Catherine and I stayed until the last wall caved. She stood barefoot in the wet grass, her dress streaked with soot, her face lit by the red glow of embers. For once her body did not tremble. She looked stronger, sharper, forged by fire as much as freed from it. What now? I asked. Her gaze never left the flames. Now we vanish. The county will call it tragedy. A candle knocked over, a gathering of gentlemen lost in smoke. They'll grieve in public and toast in private, but they will never suspect the truth. That is how we survive. I reached into my shirt and pulled free the pages I had torn from the ledger, the 3 lines that spoke of Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. My family, reduced to ink. I folded the pages carefully. These I keep for them. For memory, Catherine nodded. Memory is the only justice we'll ever hold. She turned to me then, her eyes steady. I'll head north. Charleston first, then Philadelphia. I'll vanish into another name. Perhaps I'll write it all down, coded, hidden, so someone someday might know. But not now, not when they still hunt. And you? She asked. I looked west toward the edge of the swamp. I'll disappear into the frontier. There are whispers of places where men like me can live free. Maybe I'll find others. Build something that helps those still in chains. A network. A path. We stood side by side watching the last roof beam collapse, sparks flying like stars breaking apart. Silas thought shame was power. Catherine said softly. He thought poisoning me would make me forget. He thought making me his slave would make him strong. But in the end, he gave me to you. And that was the last choice he ever made. Her words cut deeper than she knew, because it was true. The master who gave his daughter to a slave had given her to her own reckoning, and he had given me the blade I needed for vengeance. When the fire was nothing but embers, we walked, she north, I west. Our paths split at the tree line, two shadows breaking apart under the gray morning sky. We did not say goodbye. There was no need. Our bond was not in words, but in fire and blood. By noon, riders from neighboring plantations saw the smoke. They found only ruins, charred bodies unrecognizable, and whispers that the master of Cypress Grove had perished with his guests. The official story spread fast, a tragic fire during a late-night meeting. The truth that 13 men were slaughtered in their own cellar, that a slave and a woman they had poisoned for years turned the knife on them, died in the flames. Or so they thought. 41, South Carolina. One plantation erased. 2 survivors disappeared into legend. Question for you. If the truth could only live as a whisper, would you hide it or risk your life to tell it? In the months that followed, the ruins of Cypress Grove smoldered into silence. The county mourned its loss with grand funerals, processions of black carriages, and sermons about 13 honorable men gone too soon. They called it God's will, a house fire, a tragedy. No one dared ask deeper questions. No one wanted to. Catherine's name appeared once in a Charleston Gazette. The unfortunate Miss Rutledge, trapped in her chamber, perished with her father. They buried an empty coffin draped in lilies. Women in lace wept politely. Men shook their heads, pitying the master's burdened child. None knew she had walked away from those ashes with her own feet, stronger than they'd ever imagined. I was given a different fate. Records show that Ezekiel Cross was sold to Alabama 2 weeks after the fire. A neat transaction in ink, signed by Silas himself before his death, though I had never set foot in Alabama. To the county I was gone. Another slave passed down the chain, swallowed into the machinery of the South. But among the enslaved, another story grew. Whispers passed in quarters, sung low in work songs, murmured beside fires when the overseer slept. They told of a night when the masters burned, a night when chains broke and screams turned to silence. Some said a slave and a woman, strange allies, lit the fire together. Some said the devil himself came to collect a debt. Over time, the tale changed. In one version, Catherine was a ghostly figure who walked the swamps, leading the lost to freedom. In another, I was said to have built a secret road north, helping the hunted vanish. In truth, both of us slipped into the folds of history, leaving only shadows behind. Yet shadows are powerful. They move faster than facts. They last longer than ledgers. And in a world that tried to erase us, a whisper could be more dangerous than a weapon. Union soldiers marched through Colleton County 2 decades later. They found bones in the swamps, black stains on earth where no crops grew right. Some said they found tunnels under the ruins, walls scorched and marked with strange symbols. A journal turned up once, sealed behind brick, filled with coded words no one could read. It disappeared from records soon after. What mattered was not the evidence. What mattered was the memory. Enslaved families carried it as warning and as hope. They told their children, one night the masters burned. One night power died in fire. The story outlived the men who tried to bury it, and me. I lived in silence, my real path hidden. Did I go north and build what some called the crossroad? A network of freedom? Did Catherine truly die in Philadelphia? Or did she live under another name, her journals hidden under floorboards? History will not answer. It only leaves pieces, but in every piece the same truth hums. Cruelty is never eternal. Fire always waits in the cellar, 1841, South Carolina. A plantation gone, a legend born. Question for you. Do you think whispers of rebellion are stronger than the history written by masters? Years have passed since the night Cypress Grove burned, but the shadows it cast have never lifted. The official records say little. A tragic fire claimed 13 respected gentlemen and their families. End of story. No investigations, no trials, no names of the enslaved who were lost in the smoke. History closed the book as if nothing more needed telling. But history is written by survivors, and sometimes the wrong ones survive. What lingers are not their polished lies, but the whispers. Whispers passed through generations of enslaved people who survived long enough to see freedom. They told their children about Catherine, the master's daughter who was called mad because she remembered too much. They told them about Ezekiel, the slave who carried names like weapons, who turned a ritual knife against his masters. They told them that one night, justice came not from courts or laws, but from fire and blood. Decades later, during the Civil War, Union soldiers camped near the ruins. They spoke of finding bones in swamps, strange carvings on trees, tunnels under the ground. They left the stories behind in journals and letters, fragments that still surface today. And in 1971, when construction crews dug near the old Cypress Grove land, they uncovered a coded diary hidden in a wall. For weeks it stirred historians until it vanished into private hands. No one has seen it since, so what remains? A name on a burned map, a family reduced to 3 lines in a ledger, a plantation erased from the earth but alive in story, and a question that refuses to die. What did Ezekiel do to Catherine's body? The answer is not cruel, though it is frightening. He stripped it of poison. He cut away the madness her father had forced into her veins. He rebuilt her strength, sharpened her mind, and gave her back her will. That was the transformation that terrified them. That a woman meant to be forgotten could become a witness. That a slave meant to be silent could become her sword. Together, they became something the South feared most: memory sharpened into rebellion. Some will say none of this is true, that Catherine died in the fire, that Ezekiel was sold to Alabama, that the brethren never existed. Perhaps they are right. Or perhaps truth is clever. It hides itself, waits for the right hands to uncover it. Perhaps Catherine's coded journals still lie under floorboards somewhere. Perhaps the crossroad was real and men and women once fled through it, guided by Ezekiel's hand. We may never know. But the power of this story does not rest in proof. It rests in its lesson. Cruelty builds monuments, but cruelty also digs its own grave. Secrets may be buried, but memory has roots. And fire always waits. So I leave you with this. Do you believe Catherine's diary still survives? Do you think Ezekiel's descendants still whisper his name? Or do you think Cypress Grove has truly been lost to ash? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've stayed with me this far, I know you care about the stories history tried to bury. Subscribe now so you never miss another tale of blood, vengeance, and hidden truth. Share this with someone who believes that memory is the most dangerous weapon of all. Because sometimes, the most powerful rebellion is simply refusing to forget. The end of Cypress Grove is not an ending. It is a reminder that the powerless are never truly powerless, that justice sometimes wears fire for a crown.